and welcome to the Leading with Lean podcast. My name's Philip Holt, author of Leading with Lean, The Simplicity of Lean, and Leading Lean by Living Lean. And in this podcast, I narrate all three of my books, chapter by chapter, in which I share with you my over 30 years of experience as a lean leader across many companies globally. Leading with Lean, chapter 15, Breaking the Mediocrity Barrier. The definition of mediocrity. In the Oxford English Dictionary, the definition of mediocrity is given as 1. The state of being mediocre, 2. A person of mediocre ability. And given this definition, I'm pretty certain that mediocrity is not something that any organisation or individual would ever admit to exhibiting or aspiring to. Nevertheless, it is one of the biggest barriers to delivering change in an organisation. Consider Kotter's 8-step change management model, where one of the biggest issues is that the first step, creating a certain sense of urgency, is often difficult unless an organisation is truly in crisis. For most organisations, whilst its senior leaders, investors and the majority of employees might accept that the performance is not at the desired level to ultimately prosper, they generally don't have a sufficient sense of a burning platform to commit to the change for themselves. Therefore, for large parts of the organisation, change is seen as something that others need to make, as they consider their own performance as adequate and easily improvable if only others would act differently. And, while they may use the right language, their actions clearly demonstrate that the transformation will not be successful. And what you'd find in the book if you were reading it is a bit of a cliched cartoon of a gentleman asking who wants change and everybody putting their hands up, and then saying who wants to change and everybody putting their hands down and nodding their heads. This can be quite frustrating for those people tasked with the role of business transformation, and it's accentuated if the approach taken for change is focused on telling people what they need to do instead of ensuring that the why and how have first been clearly internalised by the majority of the team members. Simon Sinek codified the start with why approach to success extremely well, and the TED Talk in the subject is well worth the time. Where the organisation is able to gain enough momentum to gain some traction, the mediocrity barrier often ultimately results in its failure at step 7 of Kotter's model, which states, don't let up. The quick wins attained in step 6 create a false sense of achievement and result in the declaration of victory too soon, meaning that management attention and the guiding coalition of step 2, which have helped to foster the success to date, disintegrate and the focus is moved back onto day-to-day activities. This leaves the change managers in a lonely position and results in degradation of results over time. And again, in the book you would find another graphic. This time it's showing effectiveness on the y-axis and time on the x-axis, and it's showing a kind of a gradual improvement but with drop-off when the focus is lost. And then on the right-hand side there's a similar axis plot, but it shows a continuous and meteoric rise where there is that focus and attention that we really need. So it's about stamina, it's about sustainability, it's about that continued effort, and this is what often breaks down. So how can an organisation ensure that it breaks through the mediocrity barrier? Well, it should be no surprise by this stage in the book that leadership is a key element of this, and that a sustained, people-focused approach is required. The change process must be managed using a structured and proven approach such as Kotter's 8-step model, and change leadership is absolutely essential. A powerful technique for assessing whether the change leadership is in place is the VCRSP test, which is an initialism for vision, commitment, resources, skills and plan, and is an excellent way to establish whether the right conditions are in place both at the beginning of the transformation and throughout the process. Where evidence arises that one or more of the VCRSP tests have failed, the leadership must take action or risk the almost certain deterioration of effectiveness of the change. The burning platform. In chapter 5, the subject of change enablers was raised, and the initials that act as their mnemonic, VCRSP, were introduced. The importance of these change enablers to the lean transformation and to avoiding mediocrity cannot be overemphasised, so it's important to cover them in a bit more detail in this chapter. Firstly, vision. In order to set the vision for the organisation, the leadership must first have identified the burning platform for change and fully establish the why for communication to the organisation, with a clear articulation of where the organisation is headed. This must be in terms of both improvement in business performance and what it will mean for the employees and other stakeholders. The vision must be customer-centric and people-focused and engage the employees in a motivating vision of the future. Some thought leaders in the field of change have a certain allergy to the term burning platform, and I can understand this, as it is possible that it could be perceived as too extreme a term, or that it might incite negative connotations in the minds of our colleagues. In fact, I recently heard an excellent and inspiring thinker in operational excellence speaking at a conference in London, where he said something along the lines of, "If I was on a burning platform, I might be inclined to help put out the fire, but I would certainly ensure that my exit was clear and be ready to exit when it was needed." I understand the thinking behind this, that the metaphor could be perceived as saying that the organisation is in big trouble and that we need to put out a large fire, which might scare off rather than motivate some of our staff. However, I don't believe that this is the true meaning of the metaphor, as the etymology appears to be the story of the Piper Alpha oil rig, and specifically one of its inhabitants and workers, Andy Mochan, who, on that disastrous evening in July 1988, chose possible death over certain death and jumped from the burning rig into the freezing cold waters of the North Sea. The metaphor is therefore not intended to imply that we have a large fire that needs to be put out, but rather that the cost of sustaining the status quo, staying on the platform, is higher than the cost of making the change, jumping into the freezing cold sea. These are the critical elements of the vision, that the employees and stakeholders of the organisation must understand why the change is necessary and what's in it for them. Otherwise, without a compelling why, many of them will say, "Why change? It's not that bad." Of course, the reality of an organisation's reason for change will never involve the seriousness of a human disaster, such as the Piper Alpha, and those of us who use this metaphor do not do so with any lack of respect for those whose lives have been affected by such disasters. Nevertheless, as with most metaphors, there is an element of exaggeration that is intended to emphasise the seriousness of the subject. It is therefore essential that the leadership, supported by the lean leader, establish the burning platform, case for change, reason for revolution, or whichever term resonates best with the organisation's people. The difficulty of this will depend upon the organisation's situation and the degree of synchronicity between the organisation and its people's interests. To explain, in the first case, the immediacy of the problems of the organisation will have a bearing on the ease of making the change and the case for that. For example, if the company is on the edge of bankruptcy, the case for change will be relatively easy to make. Whereas if the company is highly profitable and a market leader, it would be a much more difficult case to prove that it needs to make the metaphorical jump. In that case, the leadership would need to determine the long-term implications of not changing and create an immediacy that can be easily communicated to the workforce. In the case of synchronicity of the organisation and its people's interests, there are a number of organisations where even when they might be in extremely difficult times, the people do not recognise the direct link between its successful future and theirs. This can be for a number of reasons, but commonly this is found in the public or highly unionised sectors, where the relative, some might say artificial employment security, is a buffer against any sense of urgency for change. For the lean leader and the organisation's leadership, this can make it more difficult to create the burning platform, but is a requisite of a successful transformation. The chicken and the pig. The second element of the VCRSP test of change is commitment, which starts and must be sustained by the leadership. Commitment. In order that the transformation not only starts but is sustained, commitment is required throughout and at every level of leadership. As was discussed in Chapter 7, in the metaphor of the chicken and the pig, commitment requires not only advocacy for the lean deployment, but also activism to be part of the change. Above all, it's the senior leadership that must be fully committed to the change and be willing to accept that they will have to change as much as, if not more than, the rest of the employees. The change starts with them and will then cascade throughout the organisation as priorities and expectations are aligned across the business. The behaviours that got them where they are today are not those that will get them where they want the organisation to go to, and so they need to be role models in the change. This means leading with lean with the 4 leadership styles and ensuring that communication is clear, consistent and frequent. They will have to show through action that mediocrity will not be tolerated, that excellence is expected, and be willing to support those in their teams who begin to live and breathe the principle. A quality mindset will and must become the rule and not the exception, not only in the end product or service, but in every element of the value chain. All too often, quality is perceived as an end product and something to be measured at the point of readiness for the customer, whereas true quality is in everything that we do, whether it is the process for determining the customer value proposition, the design of the product or service, the invoicing to customers, or purchase orders to suppliers. Essentially, it's about believing that everything we must do must be done right for the first time, with the minimum of activities that the customer doesn't value. This is lean thinking and the space in which mediocrity ceases to be. The engagement of all employees must be managed effectively and, again, clear communication around the vision and what employees should expect is crucial. Linking to the vision, honesty is mandatory for success and, whilst the avoidance of job losses or redundancies directly related to the lean transformation should always be the objective, if the vision includes an organisation that in the short term remains similar in size, but due to the removal of waste will require fewer people, this ought to be part of the honest communication with the employees. Honesty and integrity in the communication of the vision are the most important elements in gaining the commitment of the people and should not be underestimated. Where redundancies are a possible consequence of the transformation, it can be challenging for the leadership, and to do this, they must truly believe in two things related to their vision. One, the cost of not transforming, maintaining the status quo, is greater than that of the change, which includes the potential loss of jobs. And number two, that the transformation will make the organisation fitter, more agile and better placed for the future, ultimately leading to growth and job creation. Hi, Philip here. Sorry to interrupt the narration of this particular chapter, but I just wanted to remind you that all of my personal profits from the books go to charity. And so if you would like to buy a book, it would really be helpful. Otherwise, if you feel that the podcast is sufficient, then please feel free to make a donation to my current charity, which is Women's Aid. It's a great charity which helps to stop domestic violence for women and children. Thank you. The change required to transform the business requires commitment, but above all, as will be covered in chapter 20, stamina is the main differentiator between those organisations that are successful and those that are not. Unfortunately, it's often the senior leaders who give in first. Resources. In order for the transformation to be effective, resources will need to be made available, including people, both internal and external, finance and time. The organisation will need to invest in people to facilitate, guide and coach the organisation throughout the process. The investment in these resources will be part of the leadership commitment, and finance will be required for external resources where specific competencies or skills are required, and for changes that might be made to layouts or setups as part of the lean transformation. In lean thinking, the idea is not to invest in expensive automation or capital-intensive solutions, and so the financial investment should be modest in comparison to typical transformation, new product introduction, or IT projects. However, linking back to the commitment aspect, time will be something that the leadership will need to invest, and is probably the most important resources that they can provide as lean leaders. The investment in people is important and links back to the vision, which requires that people with the right mindset and understanding of the strategy are in the right positions. However, it must be realised that the employee turnover may be affected in times of change, and therefore efforts must be made to redouble in terms of succession planning for key positions and the development of multi-skilling. As the transformation of the business becomes more mature, it is natural that some of the key drivers of change will be recruited by other organisations, and this must be managed and also accepted as a collateral part of success rather than failure. Change is a double-edged sword in terms of resources, as it provides opportunities for some and inspires fears in others. Generally, those employees earlier in their career, lower in the organisation's hierarchy, or perhaps with less personal financial commitments, will see the change and the new openings as the chance to take a risk and perhaps gain a promotion or new aspects to their CV that will make them more attractive as candidates for more senior or interesting roles, either inside or outside the organisation. By contrast, those employees with a longer tenure, more seniority, or larger personal financial commitments might find the changes intimidating and be more resistant to becoming involved. Ignoring this and focusing only on those employees who are most enthusiastic can be a mistake, as it risks missing out on the expertise and skills of a larger cohort of team members who, with a little encouragement and coaching, could bring much to the transformation. Skills. A common error in a transformation or any change program is to neglect the skills of the people. This includes not only the change agents, such as the lean experts, who will, of course, need to be adequately skilled to undertake the task, but all employees. Often, high-performing employees are assumed to be able to undertake the task with their current competence. This is a big mistake, as high performers often start to fail during times of change due to a lack of lean change management, project management, and soft skills. It's therefore very important to ensure that a mix of experienced transformation leaders combined with high-performance individuals who are given the right training and coaching are recruited into the roles. Allied to this, the range of competencies required for all employees in the transformed organisation must be identified and developed throughout the process. The leadership styles presented in Leading with Lean are applicable at every level of the organisation and will need to be taught to supervisors, managers, directors, and C-level executives. However, the challenges will be different at each level, with a particular challenge at the middle level of the organisation. The management sandwich. The middle level of management are, in my experience, the most challenging cohort of leaders to break through from traditional thinking to lean thinking. To illustrate this, think about your lean deployment and transformation activity as a sandwich, whichever you prefer, be it tuna mayo, cheese and ham, or BLT. Now think about the bottom piece of bread as the team members, the filling as the middle management layers, and the top piece of bread is the top management. There you have your management sandwich. In this management sandwich, when we apply lean thinking, we quickly stimulate our pieces of bread, with the team members getting the opportunity to use their ideas and to team up with their colleagues to improve the business performance. While there may be some organisations that use lean as a short-term headcount reduction exercise, yours is one that is looking long-term and is aiming to do more with the same. The team members see the opportunities that it creates for them. The top management also see the benefits as customer service levels increase, the business starts to grow, and the operational metrics improve significantly. They've made the right choice to go with a lean transformation of their business and are experiencing lean in much the way that Art Byrne talked about in the lean turnaround. However, the filling isn't doing as well out of this. They're seeing their staff becoming autonomous. They're not asked to solve every problem anymore, as the team members are rapidly solving problems, and they are expected to act as coaches. They must work with leader standard work and are asked to undertake strange lean management activities such as commission buy, whilst at the same time the kudos and credit goes to their bosses whose idea this was. The change curve is in full throttle. Fasten your seatbelts. It's therefore extremely important that the middle level of leadership are provided with the support that they need to make the change, as they are critical to the success of the transformation, and their leadership skills therefore need to be a key focus. This will require some pretty heavy-duty training and development. You will find that those companies most successful in their lean transformations have invested heavily in the development of this level of leadership. My advice is to invest in a lean leadership certification program which fulfills the leadership requirements. It's important to emphasize that the certification element of the program as opposed to simply training. This will of course require training, but the participants will also be expected to continue to demonstrate the application of their learning through a Kaizen project that makes a modest but impactful change to their area and involves them training, coaching and developing their team members. An example of this is the training program developed at Philips and discussed in Chapter 14, named End-to-End Lean Leadership, which takes the participants through 8 days of intensive training across 2 weeks. During the training, which is organised as a team competition, the participants are trained and coached in lean thinking and work through an accelerated change curve as they experience the positive impact on performance of moving from traditional to lean thinking. At the start of the training, they form teams and are provided with tasks that are extremely challenging, putting them under a high degree of pressure. Inevitably, they neglect to consider their team formation process or the lean way of approaching problem solving, instead falling into traditional firefighting approaches, which result in low quality, late delivery and high cost in terms of their working extended hours. However, as the teams are coached through the training, they begin to adopt lean ways of thinking, lean ways of working, and developing better team dynamics and improved performance, which reinforces the learning modules presented throughout the training. At the end of the training course, they take a written exam to test their learning, which aims not to catch any of the participants out, but simply to reinforce their learning. After the course, they must complete their lean project to achieve certification. In Chapter 4, I showed the different levels of expertise development from foundational through to master level. We would expect all of our leaders to become certified at the advanced level as a minimum, and a significant minority to achieve Lean Expert certification, modelling lean leadership to the peers and team members. As an aside out of the book, when I wrote this, the 8-day lean leadership training was the standard in Philips. Subsequently, it was reduced to a 5-day training, which, whilst in my opinion not quite as effective, still worked very, very well, and I've in fact adopted that 5-day training approach into GK and aerospace where I am currently. Again, it's not a specific recipe that works per se in terms of number of days or even the content of the course, but it's about changing minds. So it's about having a training that really ensures the people on the course get an intensive experiential activity and learning experience that really helps them to see how the future could work and how it will be better and beneficial for them. So getting leaders to change their way of thinking is absolutely critical, and this does require an investment of time, whether that be 5 days plus coaching in a project or 8 days plus coaching in a project. Planning for success. To recap the chapter, so far we've covered the vision, commitment, resources and skills that are required to drive change and break the mediocrity barrier. However, to make all of this work, there is a final element that is required: plan. To make it all work, a solid plan must be in place that contains all of the attributes of the transformation. The plan will not be a static document and will never survive the first shuttle of battle. So it is essential that robust project management is applied throughout the transformation, and the leadership must be agile as it adapts to bumps in the road while maintaining the true north of the vision. The plan is essential, as without one we will suffer from scope creep, as the early successes will drive demand for the services of the lean experts and transformation managers, and we will risk spreading our resources too thinly. As will be discussed in Chapter 16, the lean leader must apply the intelligent no if they are to ensure that their resources are adequately focused, and the plan is a great defence against this. Without a plan, there is also the risk of misalignment amongst the leadership, as initial agreements mean nothing without the discipline that a written plan instills, and, as discussed in Chapter 6, horse and cannery should have been instilled in the organisation if the vision is to be honoured. The lean leader is the steward of the plan, which is derived from the vision that has been set, demanding the leadership demonstrate the commitment throughout it. The plan must be holistic and includes the resources and skills development as well as the communication plan. The VCRSP test is a critical but often neglected part of change management. Through the disciplined execution of the process, true change leadership can be practiced and the organisational transformation navigated. When this is done, the lean leader can help the enterprise through the mediocrity barrier and toward true excellence.